Trust isn't given, it's earned. And once broken, there's no putting it back together. My name is Carson Griffin. I'm 52, a former special operations officer. These days, I run a private security firm out of Austin, Texas. I don't believe in luck, only calculated risks. And when someone crosses me, I make damn sure they regret it. It started with a vibration. I wasn't looking for it. Didn't need to. I was in the kitchen rinsing out a coffee mug when Caitlin's phone lit up on the counter. One message. Nothing alarming at first glance until I caught a glimpse of the preview. Had an amazing time today. Can't wait for our next hike. Nothing in our routines suggested a hike. The name next to it, Dominic Larson, meant nothing to me. And yet I knew. I picked up the phone, flipped it over, and set it back down. Didn't unlock it. Didn't touch it again. No reaction. No questions. That wasn't how I worked. I let the moment settle in my head like a loaded chamber. Rushing meant losing control. Caitlin walked into the kitchen a few minutes later, brushing her hair into a ponytail. You want me to pick up dinner, or are we just figuring it out? She spoke casually, pulling open the fridge, reaching for a bottle of water. Figuring it out, I said, my voice steady. She gave a small nod, twisted off the cap, and took a sip. No hesitation. No guilt on display. If I hadn't seen the message, I wouldn't have thought twice about her tone. But I had. And now everything she did felt calculated. I spent the next 3 days confirming what I already knew. I installed software on her phone, basic stuff, nothing illegal, nothing that would trigger an alert. Just enough to retrieve deleted messages, track locations. Patterns emerged. Lunch breaks that didn't line up. Weekend errands that stretched an extra hour or two. A charge on her credit card for a bed and breakfast in Fredericksburg when she was supposed to be visiting a friend. The messages told the rest of the story. Not explicit, but enough. Compliments. Plans. Private jokes. Mentions of past meetups. I leaned back in my chair at the office, scrolling through each one, absorbing the details with the same level of detachment I used when reviewing security footage. Facts were facts. And facts needed a response. I tapped a single key on my laptop, saving the data into an encrypted file. Then I picked up my phone and called Ray. You free? I asked. Always, he said. A pause. Then, what's the problem? I exhaled slowly. I need intel on a guy named Dominic Larson. Park ranger. Outdoor type. See what you can pull. Ray didn't ask why. He didn't need to. Give me a couple hours, he said. I hung up and stared at the screen again. Betrayal is like a slow-moving storm. You see it forming in the distance, but by the time it's overhead, the damage is already done. Caitlin didn't suspect a thing. That was her first mistake. Ray came through faster than expected. He always did. When I walked into the office that evening, he was already waiting, arms crossed, a thin file resting on the table in front of him. No small talk. Just business. Dominic Larson, he said, sliding the folder toward me. 43. Been working as a park ranger out of Bastrop for 8 years. Before that, spent some time leading guided hikes, wilderness survival courses, that sort of thing. Divorced, no kids. Keeps to himself, mostly. No criminal record, nothing flashy. But, he tapped the folder. Plenty of extracurriculars. I flipped it open. Photos, reports, a few grainy security shots from what looked like a bar. Dominic laughing, a drink in hand, leaning a little too close to a woman who wasn't Caitlin. He's got a type, Ray said. Married women, usually ones looking for a little excitement. Doesn't stick around long. Gets what he wants, moves on before things get messy. I nodded, scanning the next page. A pattern. Just like I thought. Ray leaned back against the table. You want me to do a deeper dive? Track his movements? Could put a guy on him. Not yet, I said, closing the folder. I want to see how this plays out first. Ray didn't question it. He just nodded. That's what I liked about him. No unnecessary chatter. Just results. I spent the next week watching Caitlin closer than I ever had before. Not emotionally. Strategically. Like tracking a target. She stuck to routine, played her role well, dropped the kids off at school, kept the house in order, handled work calls with the same composed efficiency she always had. But underneath, there were cracks. Subtle shifts. A moment of hesitation before answering a text. A glance over her shoulder when she thought no one was looking. She thought she was being careful. She wasn't. Friday afternoon, she told me she had a late meeting. A last-minute change. She was already dressed for it, light gray blouse, fitted skirt, subtle makeup. Professional but understated. Don't wait up, she said, grabbing her bag. I gave a slow nod. Got it. She hesitated just for a second. Then she left. I let 3 minutes pass before picking up my phone. Tracked her location. She wasn't heading downtown. She was going east toward Bastrop. Toward him. I followed at a distance, taking side roads when I could, staying out of sight. She pulled into a hiking trail parking lot just outside the state park. His truck was already there. Dark green, mud-streaked, parked at an angle like he didn't give a damn about the lines. Caitlin stepped out of the car, smoothed her skirt, glanced around. Then she walked toward the tree line, where Dominic was waiting. I didn't get out of the car. Didn't need to. The pieces were already in place. All I had to do was finish setting the trap. By the time she got home that night, I had already sent the first email. Not from me, of course. An anonymous account. No signature, no traceable IP. Just a few carefully selected photos of her and Dominic. One from their last meetup at a coffee shop, another of them stepping into his truck. The subject line was simple. A concerned friend. The recipient list? Her entire workplace. Caitlin walked through the door at 9:47 p.m. I was in the living room, feet up, bourbon in hand, flipping through a news feed like it was just another night. She hesitated for half a second, like she was gauging my mood, then dropped her keys onto the counter with a practiced casualness. Long day? I asked without looking up. Yeah. She exhaled, setting down her purse. Meeting ran over. I nodded slowly. That's so? She didn't flinch. Not yet. Just walked past me toward the kitchen. You eat. I figured I'd wait. She pulled open the fridge, grabbed a bottle of water. I can heat something up. Don't worry about it, I said, taking a slow sip of bourbon. I already handled things. She didn't catch it. Not yet, but she would. At exactly 10:15, her phone buzzed on the counter. Then again, and again. Caitlin glanced at it, then hesitated. The hesitation was all I needed. She picked it up, screen glowing in the dim light. Then her entire body stiffened. A slow inhale, a sharp exhale. She turned, gripping the phone too tight, her voice thin and forced. Did you do something? I just looked at her. No need to play dumb. No need for games. She already knew. Her face changed, flickering through a dozen emotions in the span of a few seconds. Confusion, panic, anger. She swallowed hard and took a step toward me. Carson, you lied, I said, voice flat. She shook her head, fingers tightening around the phone. This isn't what you think. No. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. What do I think, Caitlin? Her breath was shaky now. Please, we can talk about this. I took another sip. We're talking. She looked like she wanted to sit but couldn't bring herself to. Instead, she rubbed her forehead, her free hand curling into a fist. This wasn't supposed to. She stopped herself, exhaled hard. I never meant to hurt you. I just watched her, studied her. She wasn't crying. She wasn't screaming. That told me everything. She wasn't sorry she did it, just sorry she got caught. The phone buzzed again. She looked down, then up at me, her expression shifting from desperation to something sharper. What did you do? I shrugged. Sent a few photos. Couple of words. Not much. Her breathing picked up. To who? Your boss. A few co-workers. The usual. She went pale. I made sure to keep it professional. I added. No nasty language. Just facts. People appreciate facts. She shook her head like she was trying to wake up from a bad dream. Oh my God. Bad day at the office tomorrow. I set my glass down. You should get some sleep. She didn't move. Just stood there, silent, gripping the phone like it was the only thing keeping her upright. I stood and stretched. I'm heading to bed. You coming? Nothing. Didn't think so. Caitlin didn't come to bed. I wasn't surprised. I heard her moving around downstairs, pacing, making frantic calls under her breath. She must have thought I was asleep. I wasn't. By morning, I was already at the office when Ray called. Morning news is interesting, he said, his voice carrying that dry amusement he always had when watching something collapse from a safe distance. Your wife's got some damage control to do. How bad? I asked, sipping my coffee. Bad enough. HR pulled her into a meeting first thing. Words spreading through the office. No one saying much to her, but you know how it goes. People don't need to say anything. The silence does it for them. I didn't respond. Just let that sit for a second. Dominic's feeling the heat too, Ray continued. A buddy at Parks and Wildlife says he's under review. Nothing official, but they don't like scandals attached to public employees. Guy might not lose his job, but his reputation's bleeding out fast. Good. That was step one. By noon, Caitlin was calling. I let it go to voicemail. By 2, she was texting. We need to talk. Please. Just us. At 6, I pulled into the driveway. The house was quiet. The kids were at my sister's for the weekend. Caitlin didn't know that yet. I wanted her alone. She was in the living room, arms crossed, staring at me like she was trying to read my next move. This isn't just about me, Carson, she said as soon as I stepped inside. You didn't just hurt me. You humiliated our family. I shut the door behind me, setting my keys down. No, you did that. She exhaled sharply, shaking her head. We could have handled this privately. Like you handled it privately? I tilted my head. Like how you took this into our home, our marriage, and expected me to stay blind? Her jaw tightened. She was holding it together, but barely. You had no right. I let out a small, humorless chuckle. I had every right. She swallowed, shifted her stance. What do you want, Carson? Do you want me to beg? Do you want me to tell you I'm sorry? Fine. I'm sorry. Her voice cracked just slightly, but her eyes stayed on mine, defiant. I messed up, but you didn't just come after me, you made sure everyone else saw it too. And for what? Revenge? To feel in control. I stepped closer, closing the space between us just enough to watch her flinch. Control, I said, my voice even, is something I never lost. And revenge? No, this is consequences. She turned away, rubbing her temples like she was trying to push back a headache. You don't get it. No, Caitlin, you don't get it. I folded my arms, watching her. I don't tolerate betrayal. You had your chances, plenty of them. Instead, you gambled. You lost. Her breathing was shallow now, hands clenched at her sides. So that's it? You just ruin my life and walk away? I shrugged. You ruined it yourself. I just made sure the world saw it. For the first time, something in her cracked. The defiance slipped, just for a second. I saw the realization settle in, the weight of it, the finality. She blinked hard, took a breath. And the kids, they stay with me. Her mouth opened, then closed. No argument. She knew. I grabbed my jacket off the chair. We're done, Caitlin. I left her standing there in silence. The house was quiet when I came back later that night. Caitlin was gone. No note, no final words. Just an empty space where her things used to be. I stood in the doorway for a moment, letting the silence settle. The weight of it wasn't heavy. It was just the absence of noise I no longer needed. I moved through the house, checking what I already knew. Her closet half empty. Bathroom shelves missing her makeup. Toothbrush gone from the holder. She didn't take much. Just enough to leave quickly. A suitcase, maybe 2. She wasn't thinking long-term yet. She was still in damage control, still hoping to fix things in some way she hadn't figured out yet. Good. Let her sit with it. I poured a drink and stood by the window, watching the street outside. A car passed, headlights sweeping across the front yard. The kids would be back in 2 days. I talked to them then, not before. I wasn't going to let Caitlin spin some half-truth before I laid out the facts. They deserved that much. My phone buzzed on the counter. A message from Ray. Dominic's out. Turned in his resignation this afternoon. Looks like he's skipping town. I smirked, took a slow sip. Good. The next morning, I was at my lawyer's office by 9. The petition for divorce was already drafted. I signed it without hesitation. Full custody, assets split in my favor, the house staying with me. Caitlin could fight it if she wanted, but she'd lose. By the time I left, another message from Ray was waiting. Caitlin's staying at a hotel near downtown. Room paid for the week. Looks like she's scrambling. I didn't reply. I didn't care where she was. At noon, I stopped by the office. The team was there running drills, checking schedules. Business as usual. That's how I liked it. Ray met me in the hall, hands in his pockets, expression unreadable. "You all good?" he asked. I nodded. "Handled." He exhaled through his nose, like he'd expected nothing less. "Kids know yet?" "Not yet. I'll tell them when they get back." He studied me for a second, then nodded. "If you need anything." "I don't." Another nod. No sympathy, no forced conversation. That's why Ray was the only one I trusted. The rest of the day passed without much thought. The emails kept coming. Caitlin's office was still buzzing, her coworkers whispering, HR scrambling to keep things quiet. I wasn't interested in the details anymore. The damage was done. Let them deal with the wreckage. By evening, I was home again, standing in the kitchen, finishing off the last of a meal I barely tasted. The house was still too quiet, but that would change soon. I pulled out my phone, scrolled through messages. One from my sister. "Kids are good. Let me know when to bring them back." I stared at the screen for a moment before replying. "Sunday. I'll talk to them then." I set the phone down, poured another drink. Caitlin was out there somewhere, picking up the pieces. Dominic was gone. The house was mine. The kids were staying. And me? I was still standing. Sunday morning, I brewed coffee and sat at the kitchen table, watching the sun push through the blinds. The house was still quiet, but not for long. My sister would be here in an hour with the kids. I'd gone over the conversation in my head a dozen times, stripping it down to what mattered. No sugarcoating, no theatrics, just the truth. A car pulled into the driveway at 10 sharp. I stepped outside, watching as my sister climbed out first, giving me a small nod before opening the back door. My son, Raymond, got out first, 10 years old, sharp like his mother but built like me. His little sister, Brianna, followed, gripping her backpack, eyes darting between me and the house. Raymond frowned. "Where's Mom?" My sister shut the door, giving me a look before she spoke. "I'll give you all some time." I nodded, then turned to the kids. "Inside." They followed without question, but I could feel the tension in the air. They knew something was off. I waited until we were in the living room before I spoke. "Your mom's not here," I said, voice even. "She won't be coming back." Brianna's lip trembled. Raymond's brows pulled together. "Why?" I exhaled, kept my tone steady. "She made choices that hurt this family. I can't change that, and neither can you. But what I can do is make sure you both are taken care of. That's what matters now." Raymond stared at me, processing. He wasn't a kid who needed hand-holding. He wanted facts. "So what happens now?" "You live here," I said simply. "With me. Nothing else changes. You go to school, you see your friends, you keep moving forward." Brianna sniffed. "But what about Mom?" "She'll have to figure that out for herself." I met Raymond's eyes. "You'll see her if you want to. But not now." He looked down, jaw tight. Brianna wiped her nose with her sleeve. Neither of them asked for more details. They understood more than they let on. I wasn't going to drag them through it, force them to hate their mother. That would come on its own if it came at all. After a while, Raymond nodded. "Okay." Brianna hesitated, then shuffled over to sit next to me on the couch. She leaned against my arm, not crying, not talking, just leaning. I let her. That night, after they were in bed, I sat outside on the porch, phone in my hand. I scrolled through my messages, then stopped at one from Caitlin. The only one she'd sent since she left. "I hope you're happy." I stared at it for a long time before deleting it without responding. Inside, my kids were sleeping under my roof. My business was running as strong as ever. Caitlin was gone. Dominic was out of the picture. I exhaled slowly, taking in the night air. Betrayal was just another battle. And I'd won. A year later, I stood in a banquet hall in downtown Dallas, shaking hands with a retired general I hadn't seen in a decade. The event was for a military charity, old uniforms, new money, and the same conversations about war, politics, and leadership. The kind of place where men didn't waste time on pleasantries, just hard truths and sharper laughs. Ray was at my side, sipping from a short glass, watching the room like he was still in a combat zone. "Still think these things are a waste of time?" he asked, tilting his drink toward the crowd. "They serve a purpose," I said, nodding to a senator across the room. "Even if it's just reminding people who's still standing." He smirked. "You always were good at that." A waiter passed by with a tray of drinks. I grabbed another bourbon and took a slow sip, scanning the room. Conversations hummed around me, voices blending into the familiar rhythm of men who had seen too much and still had too much to say. The air smelled like cigars, expensive whiskey, and polished ambition. A few feet away, a group of younger contractors hung on every word of an older officer recounting some battle that happened before they were even born. A couple of them glanced at me, recognition sparking in their eyes. My name still carried weight in these circles. My reputation had only grown since the divorce. Caitlin had tried to fight in court, but she never stood a chance. The evidence had been airtight. The judge took one look at the documentation and handed me full custody. She got a check and visitation rights. Not much else. I had no idea where she was now. Didn't care. She'd sent a few messages over the months, weak attempts at conversation, but I never responded. The past was exactly where it belonged. Dominic had disappeared off the map. Last I heard, he was working some seasonal gig in Colorado. Broke. Alone. Good. My kids were settled, thriving. Raymond had started wrestling, Brianna was making straight A's. They didn't ask about their mother much anymore. They didn't have to. They'd figured out the truth on their own. Speech is starting, Ray muttered, nodding toward the stage. I downed the last of my drink and stepped forward as my name was called. Applause filled the room. I walked up, took the microphone, and let the crowd settle. Betrayal, I said, my voice steady, carrying through the hall, is something every man in this room has faced. On the battlefield, in business, at home. A pause. I let the silence stretch. It's not the betrayal that defines us. It's what we do after. A murmur of agreement. A few nods. Good. I don't believe in forgiveness, I continued. I believe in consequences. And I believe in moving forward with no regrets. I let my gaze sweep across the room. Some men break when they're betrayed. Others rebuild. And the smart ones, I smirked. They make sure it never happens again. A rumble of approval. Ray lifted his glass. I nodded once, then stepped back, handing the mic off. I said all I needed to say. Afterward, a few men approached, some looking for business, others just wanting to shake my hand. I let them talk, let them ask their questions, but my mind was already elsewhere. Later that night, I sat on the balcony of my hotel, looking out over the city. My phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen. A message from an unknown number. I just want to talk. I deleted it without opening it. Then I leaned back in my chair, stretched out my legs, and let the night settle around me. There was nothing left to talk about.